Okay, hello friends. Just wait for our Instagram followers and our Facebookers to join us, which they will do in a minute. Wonderful. Hope you're all doing well. Rebecca, you don't miss the class. I'm very impressed. I'm noticing this. Okay, just a couple of moments. Welcome, my dear friends. Okay, here they come. Instagram people are joining us. Hi, everyone on Instagram. Hello, Facebook friends. Welcome. We have a tough class today. Give me one moment. Okay, welcome, dear friends, to our next class in our series of Becoming Better at Being You. And today, we have chosen, actually, I chose, probably one of the most difficult mitzvot that exists today. Actually, I'm going to say more than that. This is the most difficult mitzvah that exists when it comes to self-improvement, connecting to each other, connecting to God. This is like the perfect eye of the storm, which I think more than anything else these days, I'm actually dealing with a case right now, knowing how to honor parents, how far the mitzvah goes, what it means, does it change once you get married? All of this and more will be discussed today. I think we all have a feeling that there's something about this mitzvah which does so much for us as a people, and yet is such a challenge. Challenge which we all have to deal with, trying to learn from our parents, honor them, fear them, maybe potentially love them. Hopefully we will, although we'll see that's not an obligation, interestingly enough. That could just be a bonus. But ultimately, dealing with our parents and our children, because we are also our children's parents as well, is all part and parcel of this one big mitzvah. So let's begin at the beginning, dear friends. Where do we see this mitzvah appear? It appears in a couple of places. And two of those places we see very clearly. By the way, we'll also talk a little bit about in-laws today as well, and maybe older siblings as well. And me being the baby of the family, and as you know, once the baby, always the baby. I'm a 48-year-old baby. Those who know me well know what I'm talking about. It's all going to play into this discussion of honoring our family members who are older than us. Let's begin at the beginning. We see this mitzvah in probably the most important part of the Torah, in the 10 Commandments, the Aseret HaDibrot. Now, we spoke about this idea before. We said that the 10 Commandments were given on 2 separate stones. And I've told you how the first 5 are between us and God. Ben Adam Lamakom. And the second 5 are between us and each other. Ben Adam Lachavero. And we see over here something very important. That the first 5 conclude with mitzvah number 5, or dibur, to be more precise. Number 5, which is kabed et avicha et imecha. You have to honor your parents. Extremely difficult. But one thing you can't miss, just the visualization of this particular mitzvah puts it on the side between us and God. Because we said the first tablet is between us and God. And so we know, just by looking at where this particular mitzvah was carved into the rock of the 10 Commandments, we know there is a connection between how we treat our parents and our relationship to God as well. The two are intrinsically linked, whether we like it or not. And a big part of our spiritual service and our psychological makeup and our intellectual makeup and everything that we are is going to connect, at least genetically, to our parents, but also spiritually and emotionally and psychologically, how we connect to our parents. And ultimately, that is also going to connect to how we relate to Hashem, to God as well, which is why honoring mother and father is on the same side as our relationship to God. And the Gemara tells us there are three partners in creation. This is one of the reasons that honoring your father and mother is on the side of our relationship to God as well. The shutfut, it is a partnership between the parents and God. The parents bring the physical child into this world, and God partners with those parents and puts the neshama, puts the soul inside that child too. So we now become partners with God. We work together. There is a partnership, and I don't know about you, but if I could be in a business partnership with anyone, I would choose God, right? Because God's got your back, and God wants you to have a lot of profit. He wants profits too, but he wants a lot of profits as well. And therefore we see that this connecting of parents and God is together. And in some way you could say, and it's going to make sense when I explain it, that parents are mini gods. What does that mean, parents are mini gods? Our relationship to our parents happens to resemble our relationship to God. One is actually a metaphor for the other. I mean, think about it. Parents tell you to do something when you're a young child, right? Actually, they'll say it to you your entire life, right? Until you leave home at the age of 20, or if you're Jewish, 35. Whatever way you look at it, your parents are like mini gods. Your parents say, do it. You're like, why do I have to do it? They're like, I can't explain. There's too much into it. Just do it. Okay? Just do it and everything is going to be okay. Trust me. That's a godly relationship, right? Trusting in our parents is very similar, is akin to trusting in God. We put our trust in parents, even though we're not always too sure where that decision is going to take us. Because there is a basic presupposition, right, which may not always be true, but generally is, and that is that parents want the best for us. Now, we're going to talk about abusive relationships with parents. We're going to talk about that and challenges. I want to be very, very clear from the outset. The vast majority of parents, I believe, okay, in our communities, want the best for our children. Parents are not schooled in parenting, right? I mean, we know that. Those of us who are parents already, we know that. I think the analogy I like to use, and I used it in one of my books, is that having kids makes you into a good parent, like having a piano makes you into a great pianist. There is no correlation, right? Parents learn as they go. We mess up with the oldest, and then we get a little bit of the next one. If you're lucky to have it, and the next one, and by the end, you've given up anyway. But that's pretty much how it works. Parenting is really, really tough. Honoring our parents, says the Sefer Chinuch, one of the famous classic commentaries, right, from about 1,000 years ago, one of the authors from Barcelona in Spain, he says that more than any other mitzvah, this mitzvah is going to define who you are as a person. Everything about your personality, your entire upbringing, the gratitude you have towards other people, your gratitude towards God, your own personal self-improvement, everything about you is going to stem from this relationship with your parents. Think of all those people, especially the Jews, in therapy, lying down, paying hundreds of dollars an hour, and the person is 55 years old and says, I'm depressed. And the person always says, tell me about your relationship with your parents. You're like, my parents? They've not been in my life for 30 years. What do I care about them? They're like, it's all about your parents. There is an integral link. There's something very, very deep between our relationship with our parents, especially the early years, actually almost exclusively. Psychologists say the first 5 years of your life, you're forming your relationship with your kids. Everything comes from the parents at that point. After that, you're just cementing what's already there. It all starts with our parents. The Torah illustrates this by putting it in the Ten Commandments, putting it as number 5, which is the bottom of our relationship to God. It's almost as if we want to connect to God spiritually, we're going to have to somehow make our way through our parents in order to get to our relationship to God. They're just there, for good or for bad. And the expression that's used in Hebrew is kabed et avicha ve'et imecha, which translates, if you look in your rabbi art scroll, whichever Bible you're using, whichever Chumash you're using, you have to kavod, give honor. The word kavod actually has another translation, which is kaved. Kaved means heavy. Literally, something which is heavy is zakaved. This is something which weighs this relationship to our parents. And the mitzvah to honor parents is going to weigh heavily on us. While our parents are alive, when we moved away from our parents and got married, which are actually meant to do, more about that later. And even once our parents move on to the next world, that relationship is always there. And we bring that back their memory, and we talk about them, and we mention them in our tefillot. And once a year, we will celebrate, if you will, or relive the yard site, the day of their death. And then a Shama, as it were, comes back into this world for just a brief moment. So there's a lot going on over here. Key is, this is an extremely difficult mitzvah to do. Extremely difficult. Let me give you some examples of how far this mitzvah goes. And then I'll tell you a story from the Gemara. Everyone loves a story. When I'm going to update it for 2020 years. Just so you fully understand the immense proportions, the kaved, the heavy weight that this mitzvah brings with it. Let's begin by analyzing the mitzvah itself. And Rashi tells us, and gets it from the Gemara, that when it comes to dealing with parents, you're not, just listen to these words, you're not allowed to contradict your parents. I know that may sound a surprise, because for most of us, we spend most of our lives contradicting and rebelling against our parents. It is actually forbidden to contradict your parents. Do you have to listen to everything they say to you? Maybe not. Do you have to agree with everything they say to you? Probably not as well. Parents make mistakes, right? If your parents say, break that law, kill that person, you don't have to listen to them. If your parents say, break Shabbat, you don't have to listen to them. And yet at the same time, you have to honor them. You have to honor them as well. If your parents walk into the room, did you know you're meant to stand up for them? I mean, not every time they walk in, if you live in the same house, they're like a yo-yo up and down, right? But at least the first time, first thing in the morning. You're not allowed to call your parents by their name. I've seen people do this. It's a terrible sin. It's an avera, right? If your father's name is Harry, go, hey, Harry, how you doing? Your mother's name, Barbara. Hey, Barbara, what's going on? Imma, Abba, father, mother, mom, dad, whatever you use. Can't call their name. That's a lack of honor, a lack of respect. Did you know, a very famous halacha, every yeshiva boy and girl learns this when they're young. You're not allowed to sit in your parents' chair. Did you know that? People think it's just your father's chair, right? It's also your mother's chair. So your father's got one chair he always sits in. You can't sit in it. You are slighting your father's honor. That is true with your mother's chair if she has one chair. If your mother has one chair that she always sits in that's known as her chair, you can't sit in it, right? Many mothers, though, they'll be around the house, sitting in different chairs, then the law doesn't apply. But if your mother has a lazy boy she sits in, like with a refrigerator, remote control, and everything else loaded up into it, you can't sit in it. If you want to sit in, you have to ask permission. And I tell parents, try not to give them permission. They should know it adds to the honor. This is part of it. Can't contradict, can't come with a name, stand up. Already, you're starting to formulate how difficult this mitzvah is. Honoring your father and mother is extremely difficult, but comes with a reward. Usually, we're not told the reward for mitzvot in the Torah. You're not told the reward for mitzvot, right? You can't be told the reward for mitzvah. You're told to give tzedakah. Doesn't tell you what the reward is, right? Because one of the reasons you can't be told the reward for a mitzvah is different for everyone. Me putting in $1 into the charity box, it's different to you putting $1 in the charity box. Maybe $1 means a lot more to me. Me putting on tefillin is not different to you putting on tefillin. Me keeping Shabbat, it's different to you keeping Shabbat. It's much harder for some people than for others. So the reward is not known for the mitzvah. And actually the reward is not even given in this world. It's only saved for the world to come. However, and this is important, when it comes to honoring a mother and father, and a different mitzvah, not for now, we are told the reward. We are told you're going to be rewarded with arichat yamim. Arichat yamim. That's usually translated as a long life. I'm sure you've heard it before. You are granted a long life for honoring your parents. But that's not what the words arichat yamim actually means. Arichat yamim literally means long days. Long days. That's interesting. Why would it be long days? Because, say the commentators, I'm sure there's many answers to this question, because your days have more value. You have more productivity when you have an honor relationship with your parents. Even if your parents are not the parents they should have been, which unfortunately many parents are not. The mitzvah to honor them is always there. And you're increasing your days, your productivity, your life is more value, more purpose if you're channeling the honor from your parents, from you to your parents. Your days have more value. And people who have distressed and challenging and traumatic relationships and haven't managed to overcome the relationship with their parents, it's like their life is cut short. They've lost so much time and so much productivity that it's as though their days are shortened. But maybe it's literal as well. Maybe it means your life is given longer. God gives you more. Why? Why? What is the root of this mitzvah? Gratitude. Gratitude. Your mother held you inside her for 9 months. And those who've been pregnant or been married to a pregnant woman knows how difficult that is. Right? That alone, that she carried you and brought you to this world and fed you, take care of you, dayenu, to honor your mother and father for the rest of your lives. And your spiritual connection to God is going to come from your parents too. Actually, what makes you Jewish is your parents. That's not a coincidence. You don't get to choose your religion, right? Unless you convert. Your parents make you Jewish, right? Your mother's Jewish, you're Jewish. So there's an integral spiritual and Jewish connection, and it's not a coincidence that it comes through your parents as well. Your relationship to your parents is going to symbolize your relationship to God, and it's a manifestation of it in this world. Okay. With that in mind, let's see how far this mitzvah goes. Let me tell you the story that I promised you. And this, interestingly enough, usually we learn ideas in the Gemara, and we get given stories from sometimes great Jewish people to learn what to do, and from terrible Jewish people learning what not to do. That's usually how it works. Right? The Gemara gives ideas, philosophical understandings, and then a story to illustrate the idea. I don't know of anywhere else in Judaism where the story to illustrate this particular mitzvah, this challenging mitzvah of honoring your mother and father, the people you can't contradict, you have to be nice to, that mitzvah is actually learnt out from a story about a non-Jew. And his name was Dama ben Sina. Dama ben Sina was a non-Jew. And we're going to learn a number of stories about how you are meant to honor your parents from this non-Jewish kid. Isn't that weird? Would you have expected to see one of the great tzaddikim? And there are stories of great tzaddik, righteous people who were extremely careful when it came to this particular mitzvah, hoping to improve themselves spiritually and psychologically and emotionally by being at peace with their parents and honoring their mother and father. And yet over here it's a non-Jew. Why would that be? Why do you think the Gemara goes out of its way to tell us a number of stories about this non-Jewish boy? There's a few answers. I'll give you one answer and you can have your own answers too. Maybe honoring parents is so integral in the human story and the human condition that it's not just a Jewish mitzvah, although you are rewarded for the mitzvah Jewishly. It's a universal humanistic condition. Everyone knows you have to honor your parents. It's common sense. You don't need the Torah just to talk to us Jews and say, honor your mother and father. It doesn't say that. There is an integral human condition that is, if your mother carried you and your parents brought you up and fed you and conditioned you and took care of you, the mitzvah to honor your mother and father is still there and applies to every human who has ever stepped foot on this earth. That's how they understand it. Okay, let's have a look at the story of Dam ben Sina. Because Dam ben Sina was actually, according to many opinions, an abused young boy. His parents weren't mentally there. They weren't normal people. One story which many people have heard already, or learned from their childhood, is that Dam ben Sina's father was very wealthy. He was a wealthy individual. And he had in his safe a big diamond. One day, the rabbis came knocking at his door because they wanted to buy this diamond from Dam ben Sina's father. But Dam ben Sina's father was asleep. And the key to the safe that held this particular diamond or jewel was under his pillow. And Dam ben Sina said to them, I'd like to give you the diamond and sell it to you. However, by doing so, I'd wake up my father. And I don't want to wake my father up because he has a really bad temper. And I don't want to upset him. And therefore, I'm not willing to do it. The honor of my father is more important to me than the profit I can make from this diamond. Right, I tell this to my kids. Waking up Ibn Abba, especially during Shabbat, we're having a shluf. Keep your voices down, right? We're having a little afternoon sleep on Shabbat. Voices down. That is a mitzvah. Dam ben Sina taught it to the rabbis. The rabbis left. They found the jewel elsewhere. They wanted, at that point, they actually wanted to incorporate the diamond, this jewel, into the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol. He had a special breastplate with 12 jewels representing the 12 tribes of Israel. They wanted to buy this one diamond. It was a perfect fit. They found it elsewhere. Dam ben Sina gave up on the profit. The rabbis in the Gemara said, oh, this guy, he figured it out. He learned how to honor his mother and father. Let me tell you about Dam ben Sina's parents. Because everyone learns this and they think that Dam ben Sina lived in a perfect home with the perfect parents and they loved him and he loved them and they got on so well together. Let me give you the real version of what his life was about. Because there's another story elsewhere in the Gemara that no one seems to know of, right? I'm going to update it to 2020. I want you to imagine a young boy who at the age of 5 years old is kicked out of his house. 5-year-old boy, his parents turn around to their 5-year-old and say, you're a bum, we don't want to support you, get out. And they have nothing to do with you. And this young boy, 5 years old, is left on the streets and he manages to make a friend, moves into their house for a few days, someone else. He manages to get himself together, he goes to school. From his parents, gornish, nothing. He grows up a little bit, he graduates, he goes to high school. From his parents, nothing. He does well in high school and he graduates and gets accepted to a top university. From his parents, not a penny, not a word, nothing. And so now his parents are out of his life and he goes to high school, he does well and he graduates, he gets to the top college and he graduates college and he does amazingly well, comes top of his class and he goes into law school, Harvard Law School. And he's at the top of his class and he's having to work on the side to make money and support himself, takes out loans and sleeps at friends' houses still and family and on the streets. Terrible existence. And then he graduates Harvard Law School and he gets a job at a top firm. And he starts to make money and he gets married. From his parents, nothing. They're not at the wedding. They're not at the chuppah. Out of his life. Eventually, he becomes partner in his law firm. And he makes his way up the company. And eventually, he gets nominated to the highest legal position in America, the Supreme Court of America. only 9 members, one of 9 people that is nominated, and he wins a seat on the Supreme Court. He's now about to be inducted into the Supreme Court, to be sworn in. And there are thousands of people watching and millions watching online and on television. And he's about to be sworn into this amazing position, the pinnacle of his life. Suddenly, the doors open. His parents walk in. He hasn't seen them in 55 years. And his mother walks over to him. And she slaps him in the face and spits on him and says, "You were a bum and you're still a bum." Says the Gemara, keep your mouth shut. Can you imagine? And as his mother starts to walk out the auditorium after publicly embarrassing him at his highest point of his career in front of millions of people, he jumps up from his seat because his mother dropped a glove on the way out. And he picks up the glove and says, "Imma, you drop this." And he gives her the glove and she walks out. Now, do you understand how difficult this mitzvah actually is to fulfill? That is a real story about Dam ben Sina. And he actually went up in the rankings in Roman society and he reached the highest level. And when he was there, about to be brought in to Rome, everything was unbelievable. And his parents came in and they abused him in front of all these people and embarrassed him tremendously. And he kept his mouth shut. That, my friends, is the beginning of the mitzvah of kibud av v'em. That's when we said the word kibud. Honor is related to the word kaved. It's going to weigh heavily on you. It's tough. It's constant work. That's how far this mitzvah goes. By the way, a year later, Dam ben Sina had an animal born into his cattle, a para aduma, a red heifer, which the rabbis needed for the service in the temple in the Beit HaMikdash. And he was able to sell this particular red cow for a lot of money and made up all the money that he actually would have made many years previously when he gave up this diamond that was under his father's pillow. How far does this mitzvah go? It goes very, very far. Some say that it's so difficult to truly fulfill this mitzvah that one of the reasons that Esther Hamalka, that Queen Esther from the Purim story in Megillat Esther, was so successful in her mission to save the entire Jewish people that Hashem made it into an orphan, because the mistakes she would have made that would have occurred naturally when dealing with parents would have acted against her spiritually somehow and prevented her from being successful in her mission to save the Jewish people. So God chose an orphan, say the commentators, in order for her not to have to deal with those mitzvot, which will take at a time, and instead deal with the mitzvah of marrying Achashverosh, the Meshuggah, and saving the entire Jewish people. That, my friend, is what we're talking about. So, I get the question when I talk on this topic, let's say you have parents who are abusive. It happens, and I mentioned before, most parents, I believe, want to do good by their kids. I truly, honestly believe that most want to. Most don't know how to. Many people, unfortunately, themselves come from terrible backgrounds, become troublesome in their own challenges in their lives as well. So I point out that the Torah doesn't tell us to love our parents. If you want to, that's fine. We're told to honor our parents. That's the mitzvah in its essence. We are told also to fear our parents. It doesn't mean be scared, but there should be a certain awe that comes when it comes to dealing with our parents. Extremely difficult, especially today's age, when parents want to just be your friends, and there's the separation. There's nothing kids need more than knowing that they have parents who are there to guide them, hopefully. Maybe not exclusively, but are there and able to say no. I spoke to a therapist. She lives in my neighborhood. And I said, what's the best thing a parent can do for their kids? And she said to me, say no. Put down boundaries on your kids. That's the best way. We live in a world today where everyone is yes, whatever you want. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I say yes to my kids all the time. Whatever you want, bubbler. You want to buy that. You want to hang over there, right? My wife, she's the parent, right? But this separation, jokes aside, that we see in our society today of the blurring of boundaries between parents and children that we're all friends is not healthy. It's not healthy for our children. It's not healthy for us either. And it's not healthy for their relationship to God as well. You know, I said before that we are like mini gods over our children. We tell them to do something, they got to do it, right? That's just kind of the way it works. But you know what? There's an element that when we try to overprotect our kids and over what's called helicopter our kids, we're denying them their own relationship with God as well. Because God isn't just our God. God is also our children's God as well. We are expected to allow our kids to develop their own personal relationship with God as well. So this blurring of boundaries between parents and children, unfortunately, is not a healthy thing. So what do we say about parents who are abusive? It happens. It happens that kids come from parents who did not do a good job. I have students of mine whose parents are alcoholics, who are not present emotionally, psychologically, and were not parents to those kids. And those children hold on and harbor great hatred towards their parents. I'll tell you what any good psychologist or therapist will say, and any rabbi too, obviously. You know, you could be upset with your parents, and you can say that I wouldn't bring my kids up the same way. Most people say that, right? Most people think they'll do a better job than their parents when it comes to parenting their kids. They never do. But we all like to think that. My parents weren't great parents. I'll be better parents. Obviously, we completely replicate whatever our parents did to us, you know? We do the same thing with our kids. But you know what? In the end, we still have to honor them. Just like Dan Ben Sina, there still has to be an honor. We need to be at peace with our parents, right? So even kids who come from difficult, challenging homes, they still need to be like my parents. I don't want to be like them. They were nuts. They were crazy. But I'm at peace with that. I'm over it. And I'm able to. Because when people continue their lives with their abusive parents in their minds, I like to say, the expression I like to use is, their parents live in their heads rent-free, right? You need to be at peace with your parents. I tell people who are dating, which I deal with a lot, that if a person talks to you and still is angry at their parents, it's a red flag. They could be like, my parents, they were crazy, I don't want to be like them, but you know what, that's just who they are. I'm at peace with them, they are who they are, and I'm going to do things differently. That's okay. But holding and harboring hatred and anger, that's not healthy, and that's a sign of a person who is spiritually challenged as well. That is someone who is dealing with challenges. And yes, we are going to argue with our parents and argue with our kids. And I want to point out very, very importantly over here. And I've mentioned this before, I'll mention it again. The parents you have and the children you have as well are not by coincidence. There is no coincidence. God didn't just like, okay, here we have the Cohens. They need kids, we'll just throw these kids in. God is very exacting and deliberate. He gave you the parents that you need to fulfill your mission in this world, whether they were good or bad, whether they were absent or present. There is no coincidence. And the children you have is also not a coincidence. Everyone's like, oh, if only my kids were like, that family's kids, that would be amazing. How amazing would that be if my kids were smart? I mean, we all think it sometimes, right? My son or daughter bring over kids and like, wow, I wish my kids were that well behaved. By the way, they're only that well behaved because they're in your house, right? Someone's asked me and they said, Rabbi, why is it, right, that my kids are so well behaved in other people's homes, but terribly behaved in our home? And I always say to them, aren't you the same? Right? We all put on this veneer, this charade at someone else's house. Everyone's nice and good in their own home. So we all look at us and go, oh, I wish my kids were like that. You shouldn't say that. I mean, you may think it, but you can't say it. Even thinking it's not good. The kids you have are not, this is a very Jewish concept, right? You've got to accept the kids you have and the challenges they have are what you need to deal with. There is no coincidence. There's a family here in Muncie. They weren't able to have kids, and so they adopted. Those children became their kids, and they adopted, you're not going to believe this, 5 Down syndrome kids. Imagine that. I can't even fathom that. It's unbelievable. And so those kids became part of their life. They got to choose them. And if a parent is given kids, if a parent's given kids who are challenging and difficult, which all kids are all the time, because that's what kids do, that's what they're paid for, it is not a coincidence. The relationship with parents and children is deliberate and by divine design. God knows exactly the parents that you need and the kids that you have to deal with. And God knows exactly who to give those children with those problems at this time of history to you, their parents. There is no coincidence with that as well. Do you always have to listen to your parents? Let's say your parents, which I hear a lot, I'm dealing with such a case now, where parents don't want their kids to marry somebody else. Right? Get to in-laws in 1 second. Where parents do not want their kids to marry someone. Are you obligated to listen to your parents? Remember, 10 commandments, honor your father and your mother. Let's say your parents say, I forbid you to marry that man or that woman. The answer to that question actually is no. You do not have to listen to your parents. You are entitled to marry whoever you want. Now, this is one of those occasions where the practical advice that comes with this piece of halakha, this piece of Jewish law, is very different to the theoretical. Theoretically, a child is allowed to marry, assuming that person fits into the Jewish mold, right, of being permitted in Jewish thought, but in Judaism, but assuming they are, that child is allowed to say, I'm not listening to you, I'm not going to honor you, I'm going to marry whoever I want. That is technically true. But this is one of the occasions where we're like, there's a lot more to it. And I could speak about this for another hour, but I only have a few minutes left. I advise against it. Unless the parents are totally off base, which usually they're not. Usually there's something there. Okay? If the parents, when you marry someone, first of all, your parents get involved in your life, but their parents get involved as well. Suddenly there is this partnership. Families somehow are getting together as well. Making peace with your parents. And most importantly, making peace with your in-laws is a mitzvah. There is a mitzvah to honor your in-laws as well as your parents. It's not as great. It isn't as great as honoring your parents. Actually, honoring your spouse once you get married exceeds the mitzvah to honor your parents as well. Which means once you get married, if your mother calls you up and says, go down the street, pick me up a thing of milk, you'll be like, I'm sorry, my mother needs me, my wife or husband need right now, I can't do it. So the mitzvah actually transfers to your spouse instead. However, the mitzvah to honor your parents still exists, even at a lower rate. Same with your in-laws. Making peace with your parents and being on board with your parents' decision. Sometimes it happens. Their parents are not really happy with who you marry. The best you get is tolerate it, dayenu. If they can tolerate it and move forward, that's fine. Happens to be that for many, but if your parents are dead set against it, technically you can do whatever you want. But it's important to have your parents on board because part of life, especially Jewish life, is still, for most of us, going to engage our parents in the relationship as well. Whether it's a Jewish holiday, whether it's Shabbat, whether it's Pesach, whether it's Rosh Hashanah, there's still family gatherings, being at peace. So somehow you want to be able to work that out. And whether you need to get a third party involved in order to work that out, that's something else. But honoring your in-laws is also part of it. And I know we joke about in-laws. I joke about in-laws. My favorite joke is the difference between in-laws and outlaws. The difference is outlaws are wanted. It's tough and it takes work and it takes effort. However, it's very important that we realize that being at peace with our parents, no matter how they treated us, doesn't mean we have to love them or agree with them all the time, but being at peace with them and being at peace with our in-laws, which takes effort. Here you've got a new set of parents that enter your life that have to be kept at bay and happy and calm. You want to keep that relationship calm. And when it comes to finding a spouse for your child, if you do that kind of thing, or you try to find a spouse for yourself, you'll learn a lot, I don't want to say a lot more, you'll learn a lot about who that or those person's parents are, those who've been married for any amount of time, know exactly what I'm talking about. Then you will about knowing the person. The person's parents are going to be very illustrative and very understanding. You're going to understand the person much more by seeing the parents that they came from. I'll give you an unfortunate statistic. We all know the divorce rates here in America are, they say 50% plus. Okay? Statistically, we know, this is statistic. You can take it or leave it, but it's statistic. That people who come from divorced parents have a higher chance of getting divorced themselves. That's just the reality, and it's true. It's just the way it is. Nothing you can do about it. Your parents got divorced. It's very common. It happens. I had a friend of mine who came from divorced parents, and the girl he was dating came from divorced parents as well. And so he said, you know what? Statistically, we're like double likely to end up with a divorce because he comes to divorced parents and she comes to divorced parents, and therefore we shouldn't get married because now we've just upped the chance of getting divorced ourselves. And so my friend came up to me for a discussion on this with his future wife, and he came and sat with me, and I said, you know what? You're absolutely right. Statistically, the chance of you getting divorced coming from divorced parents is higher. And maybe by adding your wife's parents' divorce, it's higher as well. It just means that you too are going to have to work doubly as hard than anybody else when it comes to making this marriage work. Maybe a person who comes from a family who are together and function, all the rest of it. Maybe being married and having a healthy relationship is easier because their parents were together. It could be, hey, it's not fair. I hear. But once again, it's not a coincidence. You were born into that family with those parents who ended up getting divorced for a purpose. There is no coincidence. God knows that. He knew they get divorced and he put you exactly where you need to be. Maybe there's something like your personality through that particular challenge. We all have challenges, and maybe that's your challenge. And this couple did get married, and they have a number of kids, thank God, and they're still married. And yes, they put in a lot of effort. They worked very, very hard at staying married, although both of them came from difficult, challenging, and dysfunctional homes. Let's summarize everything I said. Mitzvah of honoring parents, extremely difficult. It takes constant work, which is why it appears as number 5 of the commandments. And that's why that particular mitzvah is there connecting us to God. It's on the side of our relationship with God as well. Kibbud av v'em, we have to honor our parents. Mora, Yirat, we have to fear them, be in awe of them as well. Where does this come from? The mere fact your mother carried you for 9 months and they brought you up and gave you food and education, that's enough to honor them forever. When you honor your parents, you get arichat yamim, you get a longer life. Maybe that means a longer life, and maybe that means your life will be long. You'll get more productivity out of your days and your years by staying connected and having an honor relationship with your parents. Dan Ben Asina, we saw that even people come from abusive families still have to honor their parents. They may not agree with their parents. They may not be happy with their parents, but they've actually managed to reduce the anger and the pain that comes with parents. As I said, having kids makes you a great parent, like having a piano makes you a great pianist. But if God gave you a piano, try to work on your relationship with your kids and your parents. God willing, we will all work on this relationship, thereby building our relationship with God as well. Thank you everyone for joining us. This lecture will remain on line on my Facebook page and the New York Chazak Facebook page and on my Instagram page as well. Wish you all a long and successful, healthy week. Thank you all for coming.